which I just had a great time watching at the Boyd Street this weekend. And Liars Club, now, which has been playing for a while, went down to San Diego last weekend and is now back at the Factory Place. And we have John O'Keefe coming down for only 2 weeks, and that's going to be at the Wallenboyd.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, and all of this is taking place, all of these theaters, when we talk Wallenboyd, that's great because that's literally the name of the streets.
Right.
And that's right in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. And here you are doing theater in an area where I think
we call it the bowels of downtown.
The bowels of downtown. And rightfully so. But those things are changing, and what is happening and what you're providing down there is creating some of that change.
I love it.
Yeah? I'd like to talk about that, too, but what first I'd like to find out is, could you tell me a little bit about your background? Because you came out here from New York.
Right.
And you had a similar thought and experience there that maybe some of that experience you have is what's making theater work for you downtown Los Angeles. Could you sort of bridge the gap of 3,000 miles?
I think basically my roots in theater go back to the mid-'60s and the whole beginning of what became known as the off-Broadway movement. And there was a spirit at that time, a consciousness at that time that was brought to theater, which I think I could probably relate to as my formative years. And the spirit and the energy of those times and what that was all about never really left me. I mean, as the years have gone by, different elements have come in and everything like that, but it was an incredibly exciting time in terms of innovation, in terms of the parameters of theater opening up to all kinds of possibilities. I mean, we thought it would go on forever, and then what happened, I believe, is for whatever reason, like it's happened in many other areas, the parameters of something started to close down again. And I just continue doing my work. And as far as I'm concerned, it's one through line from the mid-'60s to the mid-'80s.
Let me jump in here because I want to be able to get back to this and bringing you from New York to Los Angeles. But I want to ask about this. It seems almost that you're sorry that those parameters got limited or have closed in again.
Quite the contrary. Because the parameters closed down, I'm now experiencing the excitement of the parameters opening up again. Okay.
I see. Okay. Today.
Yeah. In other words, I feel something's coming around again. Okay. It's interesting also, we get these different names of things. A number of things that I've produced or directed or whatever people have said is performance art. You know, for me, it's a little bit confusing because I've been doing it for 25 years, and suddenly it's now performance art. Some of it. Okay. At one time, it was called experimental theater. Whatever. I mean, I think basically what we're trying to do at the Pipeline, which is the nonprofit company of the three theaters, it's called the Pipeline, is to play with theater. So theater is sort of like a piece of clay that you mold out of, and crayons that you just draw things with. And so the nature of our events, I don't even think we produce plays anymore. I like to relate to it as theatrical events. So even if it takes the form of a play, and I really haven't done a naturalistic play in maybe 20 years, you know, we're playing with it now, and it's exciting again. And
the thing I wanted to ask about in this regard is that in the 60s, I found that a lot of the rules, the traditional structures that we were taking a look at, Aristotelian rules for beginning, middle, and end structure, and you talked about very realistic plays. And I found that right up through the 50s we had that. And then in the 60s we say, wait a minute, let's let go of the rules. Let's just
test it.
Let's just and see what happens.
Yeah, right.
Those experiments create, we find some new wonderful things. In fact, I think perhaps one of the most exciting things for me out of that, I point back to that is Murat Saad in terms of experimenting with Brechtian and Artaud'ian ideas of theater and work. And I don't think if there wasn't that freedom for experiment, we would have never had it.
And it was filled with chaos and confusion and everything like that. And you need that. And you need to go through that. And then suddenly you come back and there's structure again, but the structure has been altered.
Right, because what has happened, though, is from that experimenting, you found tools. You you have a foundation on which you can now build your ideas.
Right.
And it's no longer just arbitrary confusion. There is some sort of foundation and structure that you create. That's your art form. And I look to the 70s as starting to experiment individually with those foundations learned in the 60s. And that brings us up to the 80s, where I'm beginning to see some of the re-examination again and going back to some of the 60s stuff, which I find real fun and exciting.
I mean, it's also very interesting in that the innovators, I'm talking about the originators, when it comes to some of these techniques and some of these things that have permeated traditional theater today, they never seem to get credit for it. I mean, you can go and see something like The Wiz, and the Living Theater is in there, and Joseph Chaikin is in there. But these people have always been so busy doing. It's usually the person who picks up. It's usually the person who comes along second or third that gets credit for being the innovator. I mean, the concepts even now that are brought to television even have come out of a lot of the work that was done in the 60s.
Right.
Of course, it's 15, 20 years later, and these people are onto something else, and they're still unknown.
Right,
because they're busy.
They're busy.
Yeah.
This is what brings me back to what I wanted to get back to now, is that is what you've taken with you from New York and brought out here to us.
Yeah, the interesting thing out here, though, is that I find that the work we're doing over the pipeline, and my work, is very accessible for almost everybody. I mean, even though it's been labeled sometimes as experimental or whatever, it seems that nobody has trouble relating to it. It's very accessible. At one time, it worried me. It was sort of like, I must be getting old. How come so many people are liking it? And but times have changed, and people's perceptions have changed, and it's great. Maybe I'm getting old, but I don't mind a little appreciation.
Speaking of appreciation, I'd like to talk about some of the shows that you're doing at, you call it the pipeline, but what we really mean are 3 theaters connected together by this pipeline: the Factory Place, the Boyd Street, and the Wallenboyd, which the name implies the location.
Right.
And in particular, this weekend I saw Rotundi. Now, Rotundi, you talked about titles again, or definitions, in particular performance art, or is it theater? With Rotundi, how many titles has people tried to give it? Here's one: theatrical celebration of life. Close.
Oh, you mean in terms of defining it?
In defining it, is it performance? Is it a theater piece? This is a wild experience. How about maybe you, who have heard a number of the titles, and you probably very close to it, could define it for us a little better?
Well, I think I might have been the one who came up with that theatrical celebration of life as a way of not having to commit ourselves to something very specific. We wanted it to be wide open, because it is theatrical, and because it is a celebration, and it is full of life. Hopefully the event defines itself without... See, I don't have to worry about that part to the degree that, let's say, a critic does or whatever. Our main concern is to do the piece and to excite the audience and for everybody to have a good time, and that's what it succeeds in doing. And I'd say that we're still kind of, once again, involved in that process where you're struggling to find out what it is you're doing while you're doing it.
Well, let's do that. Let's tear it apart a little bit to see some of its essences. At its base, simplistic way you're looking at it, you see that it's a polka party.
And it's a real party.
It's an incredible party between the musicians, the lead singer, who is or sort of the leader of the group, who's played by Tony Patelis.
Right.
And plays that and is the major singer. And then the audience, who is just there as part of the party.
Right.
And all of these elements come together for this, as you call it, the theatrical celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is that. It is that. What we begin to see, though, is that there are some other elements in here, like the material is not just as simple or as mindless as Who Stole the Kishka,
Right.
but the songs and the meanings, the messages of the song take on a sort of a social consciousness.
That's right.
That adds another depth. So there are many layers happening here.
Oh yeah. It's there's an element of it that I feel is very, very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another element in it that's very, very mysterious. And the blend of those two things is largely what makes it work. On top of the wonderful performance by Tony Patelis,
Mm-hmm.
and the wonderful songs and lyrics and the spirit in which it's performed, and
Yet it is, in somewhat, it has to be called a theater piece. It has to be called, the writing there, in between the songs, I say, well, how could you make a polka party a theater piece? A polka party is theatrical, it's fun. Mother and Dad have dragged me to many of them. But here, in between the songs, we have monologues that are
but it's
incredible
interesting.
poetry.
I think it's largely a reflection of what's starting to happen in theater, where suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where the old formats, the old definitions, don't absolutely define the possibilities that exist. In other words, we're doing something else called the Liars Club, right? Which we'll get into a little bit later. And it's sort of like, what it is what it is. So now it's the job of somebody else to start to find the words that will maybe encompass this particular thing, but to be able to have that freedom and concern yourself mainly with your relationship with the audience and people having a good time getting together and celebrate aliveness, which is what theater's all about, and which is so rarely experienced in theater today, because most of it is just another voyeuristic extension of the television set.
Good point.
Or the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And its strength has always been in its liveness, in its spirit. I mean, that's the one thing you can't get from the television set.
Right.
You can't get it from the screen. And
here we have it in abundance. This the interaction, and then the celebration.
Like I always said that our biggest competition is not other theaters; it's parties. So,
in this perfect example with this piece,
so that everything we do has to be a better party than any party. Most of the parties I go to are just boring anyway. I don't go to them. I'd rather go to one of our pieces.
Now, that's a real good explanation of rotundi. Perhaps the only real way to give it as an explanation or some sort of definition is to experience it. It is quite an experience. Now,
At this moment, and as we get more familiar with whatever form that might be defining,
Mm-hmm.
we'll know exactly what it was that we...
That's what it was, but what it is now is, again, undefinable. Now, that's at the Boyd Street Theater,
Right.
and that's going to be playing through April 6th. Now, that plays just on Fridays and Saturday nights, party nights.
That's right. Party nights.
And then you...
Then it's closing for 2 weekends and coming back. We decided it's going to come back.
So what you're going to do, what are you going to put into the Boyd Street Theater in between?
Bob Carroll, who is known far and wide as the performer of a show called The Salmon Show, which ran for about 7 or 8 years, has just composed a new show called The Whole Show. And he's stand up, fall down. He sings, he prances, he stomps, he dances. And the whole show is about, basically, in this spirit, about self-deliverance. suicide.
Oh, self-deliverance.
And I don't know what it's going to be. He's totally unpredictable. He's coming in for 2 weekends. That's going to be the world premiere of it.
And that's, so what are those 2 weekends? We're talking about April 12th and 13th and April 19th and 20th.
Right.
At the Boyd Street.
At the Boyd Street.
We have to make this a little clear because we're juggling 3 theaters and 4 performances.
Well, one thing anybody can do is call that phone number.
That's true. In
get
fact, we're
the
talking about
specific information.
the pipeline, which is the connection between the 3 theaters. And for what is the telephone number that they can call for information about any of the theaters?
Any of the things.
You can call in the 213 area code 629-2250. Of course,
No,
I'm sorry.
2205.
Yep, there's my dyslexia coming up again. 629-2205. And of course, we'll mention that in locations towards the end of the
When
show.
I'm not
again.
there, they'll usually get a recording, but I'm there very often if they want to ask me specific questions about any of the bands. I'm glad to answer.
When if you remember the name Pipeline, or if you remember the name Factory Place Theater or Boyd Street Theater, information will have those numbers.
That's right.
You've connected all
And the
those.
Wallenboyd is all connected.
Wallenboyd.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Wallenboyd, that's one of the other theaters where.
Okay, so I would just like to mention that Rotundi will be back.
Oh no,
after
you're going to
Bob
bring it
Carroll.
back after Bob Carroll.
Yeah,
so
we decided to bring it back. It's been received by so many people, and more people want to see it now. We're bringing it back for 4 weekends after Bob Carroll closes.
Great. So we have until April 6th to see Rotundi, or
Right.
to experience Rotundi. You don't really see it. You participate. And then Bob Carroll will be here now, of course, we're still focusing on one of the theaters. We have, in one of the other theaters, you just took a show downtown to San Diego.
Right,
in
that
fact.
was the Liars Club.
What is the Liars Club?
Okay, the Liars Club is, this is the way we've been speaking of it, an evening of original mini theater pieces which traverse a lie in pursuit of a truth and are composed and performed by the liars themselves. Now, we have a Liars Club that meets, and they are actually theater pieces rather than tall storytelling. In other words, it's not somebody getting up talking about something that happened before. It's actually a performance, mini performances that take place in real time. And they are all based on an outrageous lie. And then an experience starts to develop as the different liars fulfill their destiny or whatever it is. And it's been running now. It'll be going into its 7th month. It runs only on Saturday nights. And there will be down the line some of these liars dropping out and new liars are getting ready to come in. But right now we have the original liars, who, by the way, won 5 Dramalog Awards with this.
Congratulations.
And it's a format that I think I would like to run all year round because it forces performers, in a way, to kind of stretch themselves. Up until recently, it's been mostly interpretive. Mm-hmm. Now, suddenly, there's a format through which they can compose. And I would also like to say that many of the pieces are not composed by writers necessarily. We compose a lot of them moving around the stage, looking for the piece. And we just keep stretching the elements of reality as far as we can to move into the realm of another reality.
Again here, what we were talking about earlier in terms of definition, you defy that, don't you? And get down to the real essence of theater is that
I think
celebration.
And that also involves this whole idea of theater as play, playing with it. You know, not allowing the books, so to speak, to be so intimidating as to stop you from really having a good time with it. I mean, that's an important part of it. You know,
I guess the first fear I would have there is that I would like to grant you that, say, yes, that's the exciting part, but isn't that maybe a cop-out for the fact that the quality, you might be missing a quality of the performance, a quality in the piece, that you just say, well...
I'm not saying that all this other stuff is not relevant. I mean, what I'm saying is not to be so intimidated by ideas of wrong and right in theater where you cannot move anymore and you're stuck. I found that, fortunately, I feel that my movement into theater originally was experiential rather than going to school or something like that. And then as a result of getting stuck, I had to go back and start to understand what certain things were. But many things that have happened to me, some of the best things, came out of the fact that there was an innocence involved. I didn't know what I was doing. And even today, which is 25 years later, and whatever kind of information or education I've kind of accumulated, I still like to move into areas where I don't quite know what's going on. And a lot of the people at the Pipeline are working that way now. So we have somebody in the Liars Club who won a Drama Log Award, and his piece is wonderful. It's the first time he ever acted. He's been a musician, and there's music in it, but it's the first time he ever acted. And now he's in the process of composing a one-person, two-act musical, which I think is going to be incredible. He doesn't know he's not supposed to do that.
There's an experience there. So you bring us along, the audience along, into these realms, unknown realms of possibility.
As we venture into them, too. So there's that element of excitement. There's another format that we're working on now. I had somebody come to me with a big epic, which I couldn't produce.
And when you do Ulysses?
Well, this is not quite Ulysses, but very exciting, and he started to pitch it to me. And he was like describing these things in detail and acting out all the characters and everything like that. I said, I'll tell you what, we'll do it. If you pitch the audience, that'll be the piece. We'll give you lighting, we'll give you music. And not every playwright can do that, so it's a new format that's going to begin called Performing Playwrights. And now we can produce epics for under $100. So that's going to start.
Cute. That's lovely. We're talking a number of things here. We're talking about Rotundi, the Liars Club. In fact, Bob Carroll's coming with the whole show for a couple weeks at the Boyd Street. One thing we haven't talked about is John O'Keefe, who's coming to the Wallenboyd.
Yeah, and John O'Keefe will be coming this Friday and Saturday, and next Friday and Saturday only. And what I'd like to say about John O'Keefe is, because I'm a fan, I'm a big fan. And I remember for many years with Sam Shepard, you know, a lot of people knew about him and everything like that, and it was like, how come nobody knows, you know? And then one day, somebody points the finger, and here's this. Okay, John O'Keefe, to me, is all things considered, his writing abilities, his poetry, his directing, and particularly his performing abilities. One of the most exciting, dynamic people in the American theater scene, and has been for many, many years, and still has not really been discovered. But of course he will be, because I think he's one of the greats in this country. One
of the benefits here, it seems to me, right, is that that means you can still afford him.
You can still afford him. This weekend, Friday and Saturday, and next weekend, Friday and Saturday.
What is he doing?
He's doing two pieces, one called Aztec, and the other called The Sun Shines a Glorious Bird. I would prefer not to try to describe these things. Once again, his relationship with the audience is very, very direct, very, very powerful. And I would say that he's one of these performers where to see him one time could conceivably have a profound effect on your life.
Well, I plan on coming down, taking a look. That's this weekend, March 29th and 30th, April 5 and 6 only. That's just 2 weekends. These next 2 weekends.
Right,
and
they can also call the 629-2205 number for reservations. You can make it just by calling up, leaving your name and how many people, and that'll be sufficient.
Great. And all of these things are happening downtown Los Angeles. You know, I'm looking up at the clock, and the time is fleeting away. We've got just a minute or so left, which means I've got to ask you to come back and continue talking about theater downtown. That's just a whole area. Thank you. I hope we can do that.
And I also would just like to mention my partner, Alex Wright, who is working with me on all these projects and just as deeply involved as I am.
Great. Maybe we'll have him come down. We can really get into it.
That would be great.
Now, I'd like to mention again, we're talking about the Liars Club. It's playing every Saturday night, and that's at the Factory Place Theater. We've got Rotundi for a couple more weeks, and then it'll go on hiatus for 2 weeks, while Bob Carroll's The Whole Show will be at the Boyd Street Theater, and then it will return. a polka party celebration, an incredible affair. And then you have John O'Keefe for 2 weeks only, Friday and Saturday evenings at the Wallenboyd Theater. All of this is under the title Pipeline Productions, right?
Right.
The Pipeline. And that's all downtown Los Angeles, very close to any place in Los Angeles.
Right.
Good parking, that's really important, but it's really true here.
Security.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and that's something we're going to talk about next time, isn't it? So there's a lot more happening downtown Los Angeles than I ever realized before, and I'm really excited about it. Let me give you one more time the ticket and information number. That's in the 213 area code 629-2205. My guest today has been Scott Kelman, the artistic director, producer for the Pipeline Production Company with 3 theaters performing downtown Los Angeles. I'd like to thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you, Stephen.
And so until next week, this has been Stephen Tatar with Theater Close-Up.